This is Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. How many people in our region do not have a home? 3,000? 5,000? More? It's a slippery number to pin down. This past January, the point-in-time count found about 3,400 Vermonters without homes. Then, in June, the state said the number was more than 4,500. That comes from Vermont's Coordinated Entry Program, which tracks people who use state resources for housing and other services. The exact number matters. We want to know if homelessness rates are getting better or worse and how we compare to other states. But on the other hand, that exact number kind of doesn't matter at all. Those statistics contain individuals with family or friends or kids, medical issues, bills to pay, favorite meals to cook, pets they love. Their stories are at the heart of a new podcast that we're excited to share with you today. It's called Voices from the Edge. It's not from Vermont Public, but from an Addison County-based nonprofit called Green Mountain Justice. They describe themselves as a community ministry of sorts that supports people living on the margins. Tom Morgan is the organization's founder and the podcast's host. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us, Michaela. We love being here.
Yeah, we also have with you Corey Hendrickson, who produces the podcast. Corey, welcome.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. So, Tom, as I just said, that you've described Green Mountain Justice as a community ministry. What exactly does that mean? What do you all do?
Sure. So we kind of focus on full spectrum of care, connection, and coordination and collaboration. And we start by centering the needs of the marginalized. So we actually start with folks who are at the intersection of poverty or oppression, folks who have needs that just aren't being met by the systems that are intended to help them. And then we kind of use that energy that they have to tell their stories and to kind of lift them up and support them with our partners, and also advocate. So we're also big into having them testify in Montpelier when issues come up. And so we've only been doing this since March, so we're still learning a lot of lessons, and we're really grateful to have folks like Corey helping us out.
Yeah. Corey, how did you first get involved with Green Mountain Justice, and Tom, how did you two first meet?
Yeah, I first heard about Green Mountain Justice through an editorial Tom wrote in the Addison Independent, and two things struck me. One was that I wanted to hear Jerome's voice, and the second was that I wanted to help tell those stories.
Who is Jerome?
Jerome is a friend that I've recently met who's an unhoused, although recently housed, member of the Middlebury community.
And we'll hear a little bit more of his story later today. We're going to be airing excerpts of your first 3 episodes. So stick around to hear a little bit more from Jerome. And soon we're going to hear from a Vermonter named Jessica. Tom, how did you meet the folks who are in these episodes?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We usually come in contact with our neighbors or who are experiencing needs either through direct referrals from other marginalized folks, or sometimes they would call into the Champlain Valley Unitarian Universalist Society and ask for some help. So that's kind of the way that we got to know Jessica and her story, which is extraordinary. As she'll tell it, living in a motel and trying to raise her children is just so challenging. And so she had kind of a complex of needs. But the thing that she was missing most, I think, was connection. She didn't really have a whole lot of community except for, the community that she was working in. And so because she works 14, 15 hours a day, we were really happy to, a couple of years ago, kind of come around her and create some community around her. So we have, volunteers we call Neighbor Care Neighbors that come around and create relationships with folks who are kind of suffer from that relational poverty.
And before we listen to an excerpt from Jessica's story, Corey, I'm wondering if you have any other setup to share with us, particularly since you really helped shaped how these stories were told, which really are primarily in the voice of the person we're talking about. You hear a little bit of Tom, but that's about it.
Yeah, I think that aligns well with the mission at large, is centering the people on the margins. So that was a big consideration for me was, first person narratives, having them explain their situation instead of explaining things for them. The other thing, I come from more of a TV and film background, so on a very superficial level, I was thrilled to not have to worry about hiding mics and getting microphones close. It was like a lot of things I was used to dealing with, I didn't have to deal with. And so it really enabled me to hone in on the story elements and the voice and what they had to say, which was pretty thrilling, actually. It became visual, even though it's an audio-based medium. Yeah. It was a very visual experience for me in some way. It's a little hard to articulate, but yeah, it really was about the bravery and honesty with which people shared stories. Yeah. It also came with a lot of responsibility. So that was, it was an honor to tell these stories, and I just tried to keep it as true to their intention and their reality as possible.
Well, before you and I geek out too much about audio storytelling and microphone choices, let's take a listen to Jessica's story. She lives in an apartment in Addison County, has multiple jobs, as you'll hear, is raising 4 children, and also volunteers as an EMT.
Hi. How's it going?
I'm okay. How are you, Jessica?
Good. So I'm a newly single mom of 5 kiddos. My oldest is 19, who is now living on his own. I do have a 16-year-old who now lives in Castleton. My 3 younger ones, who are 6, 11, and 12, are still living at home with me.
Okay. And you got a lot going on. So right now, what does a typical day look like for you?
My day usually starts every day at 6 a.m. I get myself ready for the day. I wake up, get the kids ready for school, drive them to Cornwall School. After work, I pick them up from school. We go home when I'm able to leave work on time, that is. Sometimes I have to walk to my work and hang out for an hour or two, so I'm able to get a couple extra hours in. When the kids do go to their dad's every other week, I do work at my second job at Brandon directly after leaving my day job. Typically working until about 5 a.m., which gives me time to get back to my day job for 8.
Okay.
So that's my schedule.
It's a long day.
Yeah.
Jessica, take us back to when your housing issue kind of started, and tell us a little bit about what that was like in terms of, the kind of the sequence of events.
Yeah, so I ended up leaving a long-term relationship of 13 years about almost 2 years ago. I remember before initially leaving the relationship, I was searching for apartments, which seemed to be a few and far in between that were somewhat affordable. So my next thought was maybe, because I have children, there would be help out there to help me get into an apartment that would maybe be based on my income at the very least. It was pretty difficult. Luckily, Atria was able to get me into a motel for temporary housing. The voucher program had ended pretty quickly. I think you're only allowed 80 days or something. Yeah. And then you're having to do $80 a night that you have to stay there, and that clearly adds up pretty quickly.
So what went through your mind when you realized that this was going to be a challenge for you and your family from a housing standpoint? What were your reactions?
I really did feel like a complete failure to my kids. I feel like I let them down. It kind of killed me every day to know that, time was running out and that we had nowhere to go. My children had unfortunately witnessed me breaking down and crying out of frustration and embarrassment. And they knew how hard I was trying for us and all of us. All I could really do to them is apologize.
Help us understand what a day was like living in a motel with your family.
We had a dorm-sized refrigerator and a microwave that we could use for food. We mostly had to eat foods that weren't always the healthiest, such as fast foods and processed foods, which became very costly. We typically had to wash our dishes in our bathtub and find a place to do our laundry, which I could mostly do at my rescue building while I was on duty, which really helped a lot. My kids were pretty open about, we're living in a hotel and I go to mom's, and they're like, well, that must be hard, and I think they've been pretty supportive overall. Alexa actually had a friend that gave her a pillow because she said she didn't have one that was the greatest, and her friend brought one and gave it to her, and it was just, the little things really mean the most. So it was really nice.
How did you manage all of that? How did you manage, parenting and knowing that you had to be at work on time and just taking care of each other, being part of this experience. How did you manage all that?
Well, to be honest with you, my health actually took a rapid decline with all the stress. I had a cardiac issue that required me to be in the hospital for a week. I had developed really bad anxiety where I was having wicked panic attacks just because the constant, everything just coming at me and trying to sort things through my head. Like, how am I going to do this? I have 2 days before the voucher ends. I don't have an apartment. Just all these thoughts are just continuously, I cannot just lay there and not have silence. So it's just been literally one thing after another. I feel like I'm making good headway, but then I get set back with either something medical or something financial or whatever it may be.
That was Jessica from the first episode of the podcast, Voices from the Edge, from the nonprofit Green Mountain Justice. Tom, you host this podcast. You also founded Green Mountain Justice. We talk a lot on Vermont Edition about the motel housing program here in Vermont. It seems like over the last 5 years, it's expanded and constricted a dozen times, depending on how much federal and state funding gets allocated to it. But we just heard from a person who is living in a motel, not somebody who's managing the program or owns a motel or is a lawmaker trying to figure out how much money to spend on it. Jessica's lived it. What have you learned about the motel housing program over the last couple months and years of doing this work, having conversations like this one?
I think that you just pointed out something really important in the fact that when you listen to Jessica or someone who has experienced the program, we're hearing what it's like from their side. We're hearing what it's like to try to prepare meals with a microwave, to try to store food in a small refrigerator if you have a refrigerator, in terms of programmatics associated with it, I think the state still has a lot to struggle with, whether or not it's going to be able to shelter Vermont's homeless. Because one of the things that we know is that while Vermont has a very high homelessness rate, at least before, we had a pretty low unsheltered homelessness rate. We were able to find space for folks who had to live outside, and that seems to be changing. There are more and more folks having to live outside. I think you'll hear in another episode in a little while with Matt and Elizabeth some of the problems associated with some of the motels that are in the program. And so I think that's valuable because a lot of times when you listen to the state or listen to other folks talk about the program and you don't hear the stories of the folks who are living in them, you don't get to you get this idea that there's good oversight and the motels are being taken care of, and so this kind of closes that gap of knowledge, I think, for folks. If folks are more aware of kind of what it's like for them to have to live like this, folks are probably going to be more empathetic to the need and perhaps more willing to invest in the needs of the marginalized.
Corey, I'm curious if your views on the motel housing program here in Vermont shifted after engaging so closely with these personal stories.
Yeah, I first learned about some of these issues. I did a film dealing with food insecurity, which there's a lot of overlap. And a lot of the things I heard during COVID times and after COVID times, those issues persisted and they manifest in the same way, which is even though there's access to food shelves and canned foods, it's not always the ability to process those materials into a hot meal doesn't always exist or is not always accessible. So even though there's things are being, that work is crucial and important, but there's another step to making sure people are actually getting nutritious meals and have the ability to take food ingredients and make into a meal. The other thing too for me was the food insecurity part is somewhat of an invisible issue. And for me, being in Middlebury, unhoused people is not abstract. I mean, you drive into town and you see folks living outside. So that was a big eye-opener for me. And I had a bit of naivete towards the end of COVID thinking some of these issues were going to be resolved, like food insecurity. We'll figure this out. And it's been, to me, amazing, challenging, inspiring to do more work, that these issues are not getting better. And COVID's gone away. It's in the rearview mirror, but the stuff that was exposed during that time is still a lot of people's reality.
Yeah. COVID might have exacerbated these issues, but when COVID left, the issues did not.
Yeah, there's still a lot of Vermonters that are hungry and sleeping outside.
Yeah. Well, if you've worked with an organization like Green Mountain Justice to find more permanent housing or for other supports, you can join the conversation. Our number is 800-639-2211. You can also email us today with your thoughts on what you're hearing to vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. We'll be back in just a moment after a break. Stay with us.
Thanks for listening to Vermont Edition, where support comes from UVM Cancer Center, sharing that November is Lung Cancer Awareness Month. Learn how lung screening can save lives at vermontcancer.org.
Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. A new podcast from the nonprofit Green Mountain Justice shares people's stories in their own words. Each episode, you hear about the life of a person who lives in our region and has struggled with housing insecurity. That is, they've had to live outside or in a shelter or other temporary housing as they try to find a more permanent home. It's called Voices from the Edge. Our guests today are producer Corey Hendrickson and host Tom Morgan, who also founded Green Mountain Justice. And in just a moment, we're going to play a segment of episode 2. But first, Tom, I know that you all have kind of a unique role right now in helping the state and people who don't have permanent housing prepare for winter by kind of helping to administer these cold weather shelters. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh, thanks for asking. Yeah. So the state has a program called Extreme Cold Weather Shelter Program. And this year, the administration of that program is being done by Vermont Interfaith Action Network. And Vermont Interfaith Action brought me and Rick DeAngelis from Washington County on board to serve as kind of their project leads for the various shelters. And the state set out certain parameters, like 7 regions or 6 regions for shelters. They set out a certain dollar amount, et cetera. And so we just had to work in there to find communities that would be willing to establish cold weather shelters in each of those areas. So we were able to create 7, which we're going to kick off on 1st of December. We feel very fortunate to have these partners that are willing to do this really difficult work of sheltering some of the most vulnerable Vermonters during the most extreme conditions.
And we're starting to see those conditions come in maybe a little sooner than we were expecting them in certain parts of the state, too. So we're about to hear from Jerome. And Corey, I'm hoping you could help us introduce him a little bit. Jerome Hazelwood, he's a veteran. He's a Black man living in Vermont. Tell us a little bit more about him.
Yeah, Tom has a much longer history with Jerome, but I have met him a few times, and to me, the honesty with which he shares his story was almost startling. And in addition to it made me realize I live in very much a bit of a bubble, and the fact that we inhabit the same town, yet his perception of places that are safe to go, places that are reliable or non-judgmental, these things don't even come on my radar. Like I never have those. I don't have to face that judgment. And to hear him speak about that, it upsets me.
Yeah. When you first met him, Tom, what was he carrying?
Yeah, so Jerome was carrying the remains of his wife in an urn when I first walked up on him when he was in the town green in Middlebury, sleeping on the floor of the gazebo. And that's kind of where our story started. And I was just with him yesterday moving stuff into his new apartment. So we've had a relationship for like 2.5 years now. And that's kind of another thing that we probably need to say is, this is all about relationship. And in ministry, the 3 things that we have to do are help folks find purpose and meaning in their life, We have to help folks form healthy relationships and detach from unhealthy ones. And we also try to connect through whatever is transcendent to them. And doing this work as I do with the marginalized, they have those same needs. And that's one of the reasons that we're able to build this trust with them where they'll tell us their stories.
Well, let's take a listen to Jerome's story. And it begins with him describing a typical morning for him and his wife, Karen, who you mentioned, Tom, has passed away, when they lived together in an apartment in Brandon.
Yeah, I usually get up just like I do now. I get up super early. I don't know if that's a holdover from being in the Army, but, I get up about 4, and I've got the coffee going by 5, and I go in and I talk to her, give her a kiss, good morning, see if she wants breakfast or if she's going to go for a walk. She usually took the dog for a walk for a few hours if she was feeling well. And, if she did want breakfast, it was usually ready by the time she got home. She'd come home and she'd journal, or, when she was up to her, she'd do chores around the house, just small things she wanted to have done. But, about midway through our marriage, she got sick and she couldn't do a lot of that stuff. So I had to take it over. And the only thing I was really concerned with was whether or not she was going to like my cooking, because I had to take over the cooking duties. And I was a little nervous about that. But yeah, I took some pictures of her eating my food, believe it or not. I'm kind of a dork, but.
Karen, what do you think about my fried chicken? Pretty good?
Pretty good. Very good. No
Very
complaints.
good. Oh, okay. Okay, who do you think has the best fried chicken between the two of us?
You.
I don't know about that, but I think it's
She was smiling in those photos, so she likes my cooking. So that worked out. And, things that needed to be fixed and, things she was able to help with before, light repairs and running errands and stuff. She just couldn't do that stuff anymore.
What was that transition like?
Difficult because when I first got with Karen, she had some health problems and she told me, she didn't think she was going to live more than a couple of years. And that's not something I wanted to hear. We had just gotten together. So it's like, well, what are you talking about? But, I did what I could. So it lasted more than a couple of years. It was over 10 years. I wanted it to be longer, obviously. But when she got sick, it was hard to watch because she's like my mom in a lot of ways. She was a nurse. She was an RN. She was an ICU RN. My mother was a nurse as well. And as far as Karen, there's not a whole lot to say. I mean, I've never met anybody like her. She was smart and funny. And once you got to know her, she was pretty engaging. She's a little shy, but I got lucky, when I met her. She's very active and can't sit still, so it was hard for her. It was frustrating. She liked to be outdoors, especially on a day like this, and she just couldn't do any of that. And she didn't like being alone. So when I had to go into town maybe to pay bills or shopping or something like that, she'd want to come, but when she got sick, she couldn't come anymore. So that was difficult for me,
What about the financial situation in that transition changed for your family because of her inability to work?
That's when it was very difficult. And we were just surviving off of my income. So once that money ran out, we were, sleeping in the bushes for 7 or 10 days out of every month. Once we got here and the VA took over, we were able to move into an apartment in Brandon, and it was subsidized. So this was prior to her, and maybe 4 months after we moved to Brandon, she received her settlement. So financially, things got easier, but we weren't really able to enjoy it because it was right around the same time she got sick. So now I'm doing a lot more than what I was doing initially, and I have my own health issues. I just wasn't as bad as she was. But within a month's time, I lost my home. About Karen first, then I lost my home, and then I lost my health. I wasn't able to walk. I needed spinal surgery, which is something I'd normally discuss with her. It's pretty serious. And I just lost her, a few weeks before that. Any one of those things can change a person's life, like put you on a different course. But they all happen like one after the other. So I wasn't really ready for it.
I mean, I remember you then, right? And you were seized up.
Oh, yeah. And, I still have my moments. I still cry. I just don't like to do it in front of people. So it's usually by my cot, but it isn't like the first year and a half. It was pretty much almost every day. And some days, most of the day, which is difficult when you're homeless because there's no privacy.
Right.
Where are you going? And so I got a lot of comments, and they weren't always nice, which I didn't get. It's like, where's your empathy? I mean, my wife just died.
So after your eviction, you found yourself, on the street.
Actually, I wasn't evicted. I just didn't want to go begging
Sure.
the landlord, so I just packed up and left.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So because you lost half, like you
Half
said.
my income. And so if I had to go begging the landlord, he's letting me stay there on credit, and I'll have half the money. That wouldn't have worked. And plus I would have fallen further behind, and it just wasn't going to work for me. So I had already made up my mind,
Ah, okay. We're going to move into the other intersection that you had to face, right? Which is, here you are, you're trying to do the right thing. You're trying to maintain your dignity. You're not going to go begging the landlord for the other half of the rent. You know this. You're trying to take the burden off other people. But you're a black man in Vermont, and you're navigating through the streets. And just give us some examples of what that's like.
What I'm learning is if there's racism, it's kind of like of the Archie Bunker variety. Like, people here are not used to seeing a lot of black people, but I think most of those people can be won over. I still have to be careful, and I seem to run into, folks that will cause those kind of problems more so early in the morning or late in the evening. Especially early in the morning, the type of people that are shuffling off to work and going to the convenience store maybe to get, an energy drink or something like that. But I have to think about this stuff.
Just give us some interactions that you've had.
Okay, so this time coming back to the shelter, within a week of being there, I was having a difficult day. Somebody decided they were going to call the cops on me, call the police. And of course, I was angrier after that. I got stopped about a block away from the shelter. I explained what happened, and they let me go. They actually listened, and they believed my story. It made sense, so I got to go back to the shelter. That was one incident. So now I'm cautious about going into town and going anywhere. Vermont is a very white state. It is. But the culture is different. The politics are different. So you will find empathy here.
That was the first part of Jerome's story. You can hear more on the podcast Voices from the Edge. You also heard a little bit of the podcast host, Tom Morgan, in there. Tom, I don't want to give away too much of the rest of the episode. It's really beautiful, and folks should listen to Jerome tell his story in his own terms. But one thing that you jump in about is explaining how the current climate at the federal level is jeopardizing funding for folks like Jerome, because people are feeling the need to kind of self-censor how they report data that regards somebody's race. Could you talk a bit more about that? Because we've been having a lot of conversations here on Vermont Edition about how to localize what's happening at a federal level and really understand what the on-the-ground implications of some of these big administrative changes are.
Sure. Well, for black people in Vermont, Vermont has one of the lowest home ownerships of BIPOC citizens of any state. And so it's important that we're able to collect the data to indicate that, how we're doing in terms of equity. And so when we start self-censoring, or we start not collecting data based on historical marginalization traits, then we're going to start losing track of how we're doing with the systems we're constructing to help people.
Yeah.
And in terms of the federal approach to this, also for Jerome, it also created an environment in which he has to live in, which is this. It's always the disenfranchised that pay the highest cost for divisiveness in politics. And so Jerome has to go out and navigate that and live in between that every day. And that's kind of what you hear when you're in relationship with him.
Yeah. Well, we have some folks calling in with thoughts. Nate is in Hyde Park. Nate, go ahead.
Hi, I work for a shelter here in Hyde Park, and I do a podcast that's very similar to what you're doing, kind of voices of people who are experiencing homelessness. I've also found that, people who are in it sometimes have if they're really in the trauma of being homeless, sometimes it's harder for them to really talk about it because they don't understand even what they're going through, not because they're limited, but because they're still going through it. They're still in this sort of trauma that I think a lot of people don't understand. And here in Lamoille County, people tend to be more invisible because we are even more rural than, say, Middlebury. There are a few congregating points for people experiencing homelessness in our area, but a lot of people are just out, in the woods, or they're staying with friends somewhere in often very untenable situations that are, could deposit them back onto the streets at any time. So thank you for doing what you're doing. And I wondered how you address that, how you find people who are ready and able to talk and articulate their stories without sort of either re-traumatizing them or getting them at such a point where they can't really even articulate what they've been through. Because some of the stories, we've had people who have literally grown up with no supports, whose parents weren't there for a whole variety of reasons, and they're shuffled around to different relatives, and there's just never, their whole lives are this sort of cycle of a lack of support, a lack of money. There's a lot of chronic poverty, generational poverty, and so on. And I guess how do you, in your podcast, how do you find people who are ready and able to talk about what they've been through in a way that doesn't harm them,
right?
And
doesn't re-traumatize them. And Nate, it's so interesting to hear you say that you're doing a podcast that has kind of similar goals, but in a different part of the state. That's great to hear about as part of this conversation. Corey, Tom, which of you wants to address this great question from Nate?
Yeah, in terms of trauma, I think being trauma responsive in this work is really critical. We've actually not gone out and looked for anybody yet, I don't think, that's wanted to tell a story. Jerome has testified in Montpelier for Three Squares and for other things. He feels that it's his purpose in life to advocate for himself and folks who are experiencing life like him. And the same goes for Jess. Jess couldn't believe that she was in the situation she was in. She's like, well, if people just knew the situation I'm in, then maybe they would, change their mind about folks who are living in a housing insecure environment. And the same goes for Matt and Liz. Actually, Matt and Liz were very, very aggressive about wanting to get this story out. So I guess one of the things that I would say is I think we have to be careful when we project our perspective as folks who live with privilege of their agency. And so we really respect the agency of the folks that we work with. And if they want to tell their story, we're here to get the story out.
Yeah. Corey, you have anything to add there? Particularly from your role as a producer, sort of creating that space that feels safe for somebody to tell a story that they want to tell.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because I do come from more of a TV film background, and it's just, there's a level of intimacy with audio only that's very different than having a camera present. And I felt like even in the interview setting, at the very basic level, there's a personal closeness that you're with this person in proximity physically that you wouldn't necessarily be in a film type setting.
Yeah.
And there's something to that that's kind of hard to articulate, but it's kind of a vibe where you're getting into heavy content and you're there together. It's not extractive, it's not exploitative. It's kind of like, to me, I feel like it's really like mean, the highest purpose of the craft is to share these voices. So it's powerful, and I'm mostly trying not to mess up the technical part.
I think you can hear in Corey's voice too. There's a little co-liberation going on, right? Like we're kind of we're in relationships, so we're kind of co-liberating each other. Yeah.
We have more voices, more stories to share. We do have to take one more quick break, though. You're listening to Vermont Edition. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. This hour, we're joined by the makers of a new podcast out of an Addison County organization, Green Mountain Justice, that they do work all around the state. This podcast highlights the stories of Vermonters who don't have stable, affordable housing or didn't have it in the recent past. The podcast is called Voices from the Edge. Our guests are producer Corey Hendrickson and host Tom Morgan. But before we play our last segment today, I want to take one more caller. We have Chris calling in from Burlington. Chris, go ahead.
How's it going?
Hey.
I just want to say that I think, as a society, that we can all come together and, start putting people, in homes ourselves as we, we'll take animals and other, objects, and we can give them homes. We can give the people places and maybe give the households tax incentives and bring people away from the streets and not look down at the street.
Thank you, Chris, for that suggestion. So maybe giving people tax incentives if they're willing to open up their home. Tom, did suggestions like this come up when you're trying to figure out, like, what can we do at an individual level versus a state versus a federal level?
Yeah. So, Chris, that's a great point. And I really appreciate the way you started that by pointing out that, hey, why don't we do an inventory and see how many empty bedrooms and empty houses we have around Vermont that could be inhabited? Because we got to create relationships with folks and start thinking about how is it best that we can connect folks who might be uncomfortable dealing with people who aren't like them or people who have had to live a life like this, and start kind of more investing more in that kind of those kind of programs. Yeah, I mean, tax incentives. Matthew Desmond's book, Poverty by America, talks a little bit about that. There are some really innovative approaches, and I really appreciate the fact that you're thinking about the person and connecting the person with folks who already have space. It's the same whether you're talking about foster care or folks who are experiencing intersectional marginalization.
Well, thank you, Chris, so much for calling in. Let's play one more clip from your latest episode. This one is about a couple, Matt and Elizabeth Liz, and you'll hear Matt first.
We were jumping from apartment to apartment to apartment every year to year and a half. Landlords were remodeling, and our last apartment we had in Bristol was Ledoux Properties. And she passed away. That's when we became homeless. When our landlord passed away, she willed it to her son. Her son didn't want nothing to do with it. He put it on the market. He sold it. The new landlord came in. Everybody out. We're remodeling. We're not renewing leases. And the apartment that we were in, what were we paying? It was $950 or $1,100 a month. They went to $1,900 a month, the same apartment, and it went from $1,100 to $1,900.
And we stayed as long as we could there because I was sick.
I told them we weren't leaving until we found a place, but they ended up paying us to leave.
We ended up sleeping in the car for that winter.
Well, describe what happened there. What do you mean they paid you to leave?
Because I told them we weren't leaving until we found a place to go to. And then they offered to give us 2 months' rent back. Just to leave. Just to get us out so they could do what they had to do.
That's the winter we slept in a vehicle in the cornfield with the 2 cats. Junior.
2 cats, dog, us, our belongings.
As soon as they gave you the 2 months, then
we looked for places and we couldn't find anything.
The reason we accepted the money was we figured we'd be able to find another apartment with it. But
that time of the year, people were already, college just started back months before that, remember? So places were being scarfed up by college kids and people just looking for places to live. And
rent's expensive.
So we thought we'd take the money and just get another apartment, but that did not work out.
We ended up using that money to survive.
And you ended up
living in a cornfoeld that winter with the two cats.
In our car. Not really in a cornfield, but...
Well, in a field.
It was a cut down field. But it was a safe place that we knew.
A little hidden, out of the way, so,
I was able to back in, out of sight. So, we had 2 cats, their litter box, our dog Junior here, us, what we could pack in the car. It was rough. And it hasn't ended yet.
And your health started going down, right? So let's take us and tell us about your health. What ended up happening?
I was sick and didn't want to go, but we had to. Living in the car, ended up with pneumonia and a pretty much double ear infection and stuff like that, just sick. And it hasn't really stopped much because we're bouncing from place to place now and other people's germs are in there. It's not like it's our own dwelling constantly where you can clean it. And, you can clean it, but you just keep moving around.
These motels that we're staying in, some of them are not fit for an animal to live in. And they don't care. They're putting people in there. We have told them about it, and they don't care. They don't say nothing about it. And we just move on to the next dump. The Budget Inn in Barrie, we're staying there. There's black mold all over the ceiling, black mold in the air conditioning that we're using because it's hot in there.
I ended up at the hospital.
Yeah.
I ended up with pneumonia again.
We ended up leaving everything we owned in that room because it's covered in mold.
I just bought brand new clothes, the air fryer, the convection oven. We bought a lot of stuff.
Paid for it with our own money out of our checks, and we left it there, brand new.
Couldn't take it. It was covered in mold.
Yeah.
There was no sense in it. Mold spores you just don't mess with. So we left it. And we keep leaving stuff. We keep throwing our clothes out, 8, 10 garbage bags at a time because of mold from these places.
From living in a tent, vehicle, they all get... our vehicle has got a smell to it now because of living in it.
It smells musty. And in the motels, it's the same way. You have to sleep with the windows open, fans going, whatever.
Because of the smells, because of the mold, because of...
They're just not...
It's other people's germs.
Yeah. But when we get in there to clean it, it doesn't matter because it's into the structure itself. By then, it's ruined. It's into the floors, it's into the walls, it's in the bedding.
These motels just don't give a damn.
I see it like this. If they were to... If they had to live like us, put them in our shoes, the owners. Put them in them rooms, exactly. Would they live in it? No, they would not. So why would they treat everybody else like that if they won't live in it themselves?
That was Matt and Liz from the latest episode of the podcast, Voices from the Edge. Tom, as we were listening together, you mentioned that when they were talking at the beginning about how their landlord passed away and that kind of started them down this road that they were on, that you hear that story a lot.
Right. Yeah. It's as Vermont is aging and folks who have properties that they were renting, and maybe they have a different set of values or whatever, but they pass away and their kids take over the properties or somebody else takes over the properties. It seems like, that kind of predatory capitalism is taking over and folks are more interested in turning, a dollar on the properties. And so a lot of folks end up housing insecure because of that. And that's we see that quite a bit. Yep.
Yeah. These episodes have been coming out about once a month. Corey, what's the plan for the future? Do you have more episodes lined up, more stories?
We do, yeah. We were just talking on the way here about doing kind of a pre-interview call with the next next partner for the show. And yeah, I think the plan was to do an initial run of 6 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the stories are out there, and I think I'm thrilled that they're getting exposure.
Yeah. And some of the folks who you're featuring, their lives changed a lot in the course of their time interacting with Green Mountain Justice. I mean, Matt and Liz have had some relatively happy news recently, right?
They have, yeah. Rutland Housing Authority, they moved into an apartment down there, and thank goodness, because they were evicted from Rutland apartment in 2024. So we with some other partners helped to get that reversed, and that also says something about advocacy and individual advocacy as opposed to, it's great to protest and things, but when you have a relationship with someone and you tell them, hey, I will go to this hearing with you, or I will make these calls with you. I don't know that we've ever seen it fail. As long as you're willing to put the work in and advocate for your neighbors, I think it's succeeding pretty much every time. It's just a matter of reaching out and making those connections.
Yeah. It kind of set me up perfectly for the last question I was going to ask both of you, which is about how folks who have been listening this past hour can help, and particularly folks who might be listening and don't have a ton of extra resources themselves, can't write a big $50,000 check to an organization they think is doing really well. Tom, you just mentioned a great example of spending time with somebody, accompanying somebody to one of these hearings or meetings or appointments that they have. Other ideas?
I think just realizing they're not monolithic.
Yeah.
Unhoused people have any range of stories, and I think a lot of those stories are closer to your reality than you might think. And I don't feel that removed from any of these people, and it's just, it can really happen to anybody. And I think seeing folks and seeing them as a human first, and then their circumstances, to me is transformational. And I think each one of the people we interviewed has made a point to say that we're not all one thing, and it's very easy to lump unhoused people experiencing housing insecurity into one group, and I think it does them a disservice, and I think it makes working with them more challenging.
Yeah,
we have something called the neighbor care ecosystems. So we believe it's kind of like a fractal. That's pretty much what we developed here, and we'd like to replicate that fractal throughout the state. So basically, you create a set of community partners or just neighbors who want to pitch in and identify folks, walk around their community, find folks who need some help, and then just start helping them and just start connecting with them. And then connect them with trusted partners in social services as well. That's kind of the neighbor care ecosystem, and includes third spaces and other things. But we feel like this is kind of, Vermont is made for this. This is kind of our culture. It's in our DNA. So we should be really good at it.
Tom Morgan of the organization Green Mountain Justice also hosts the podcast Voices from the Edge. It's produced by Corey Hendrickson. Tom, Corey, thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Michaela.
Thank you very much.
And be sure to listen to Voices from the Edge yourself. We played just a couple excerpts from the podcast today. We'll link to it in our show notes for today's show, in our podcast feed, and on vermontpublic.org. All right, that's it for today. Our show was directed by Mary Angish. John Ahrens is our managing producer. Andrea Lorian, Daniela Fierro, and Aaliyah Papes are our producers. Our call screener today was Kelly Delorier, and our theme music is by Myra Flynn. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch up again soon.